The humid breath of the A Shau Valley pressed down on Sergeant Miller, a familiar, suffocating blanket that had long since replaced the crisp air of his Kansas plains. Specter Platoon, a six-man reconnaissance team, had been dropped at dawn, the Chinook's rotor wash tearing a temporary hole in the dense triple canopy before leaving them to the oppressive silence. Their mission: infiltrate Sector Gamma, a known NVA infiltration corridor, locate a suspected tunnel complex, and report. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Miller led the way, his M16 clutched tight, the weight of his gear a constant, familiar ache. Beside him, Corporal Tanaka, ghost to the squad, moved with an almost preternatural grace, his eyes constantly scanning, deciphering the jungle's subtle language. Tanaka was the point, the team's early warning system, a man who could smell danger before it materialized. Behind them, Doc Ramirez, the medic, carried his aid bag with a stoic practicality that belied the horrors he'd witnessed. And then there was Private Daniels, fresh out of basic, his youthful face a mixture of wide-eyed apprehension and feigned confidence. Daniels was the new blood, his fear palpable even through the stifling heat. The first few hours were a brutal baptism for Daniels. The jungle was a living, breathing entity, a green labyrinth of razor grass, tangled vines, and unseen hazards. Every rustle was amplified. Every snap of a twig underfoot sounded like a gunshot. The silence, however, was what truly unnerved Miller. It wasn't a natural quiet, but a vacuum, a hell breath. The jungle had a rhythm, a constant hum of insects and distant bird calls. Today, it was muted, expectant. Miller's gut, seasoned by 2 tours, screamed that something was wrong. This wasn't the usual cacophony of a busy jungle. It was the calm before the storm, a stillness that spoke of an unseen presence. He signaled a halt. The men dropped into defensive positions, M16s sweeping the immediate perimeter. The only sounds were their ragged breaths and the drip of condensation from the leaves above. Daniels, his face slick with sweat, gripped his rifle so hard his knuckles were white. He tried to mimic Tanaka's effortless vigilance, but his eyes darted nervously, seeing threats in every shadow. Miller watched him, a flash of pity mixed with professional detachment. He knew the jungle chewed up the new ones first, especially those who couldn't reconcile the beauty with the brutality. "What's up, Sarge?" Daniels whispered, his voice cracking slightly. Miller held a finger to his lips, listening. Nothing. That was the problem. Too quiet. Even the usual chatter of monkeys seemed absent. Tanaka, hunkered down, made a slow, deliberate hand gesture, movement followed by small and recent. His face was unreadable, but Miller saw the subtle tension in his jaw. The deceptive calm had already begun to exert its insidious pressure. They weren't alone. They had never been alone. Tanaka's signal had been barely perceptible, a flicker of his fingers, but Miller understood. The ghost hadn't just seen something. He had felt it. They waited, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Then Tanaka slowly lowered his hand, pointing to a barely disturbed section of mud near a fallen log. Miller crawled forward, his eyes dissecting the earth. There, almost invisible to an untrained eye, was the faintest indentation, the outline of a boot, pressed down lightly, then expertly wiped clean. It was a partial print, meticulously erased, but the telltale compression of the soil was undeniable. NBA, and fresh. Too fresh. Not a patrol passing through, but something more deliberate. 2, maybe 3 men, Tanaka whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. Came this way, then veered off. Fast. He pointed to a high branch, where a single, small leaf, just fallen, had been snapped clean from its stem, not torn. An unnatural break. Miller's gaze followed the trajectory, imagining the unseen figures moving with the same stealth. It was the NVA's signature, precise, methodical, almost ethereal. They left just enough trace to be unsettling, but not enough to be pursued. This wasn't about being ambushed. It was about being shadowed. The realization sent a chill down Miller's spine, despite the oppressive heat. They were being watched, or had just barely avoided being watched. The jungle wasn't just quiet, it was actively concealing. Daniels, craning his neck, struggled to see what they were seeing. "What is it, Sarge?" "I don't see anything." Miller pointed, guiding Daniels' gaze. "Look at the moisture in the soil, the way the light hits that little compression. And the leaf, see how it's snapped, not torn by an animal. It's a signature, Daniels. Their calling card." Daniels squinted, a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension on his face. The abstract concept of enemy was suddenly concrete, invisible but present. "So they know we're here?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "They know, or they suspect," Miller corrected, his voice flat. "And they're letting us know they know." This was the psychological game, the opening gambit. The enemy wasn't attacking, they were playing. They were waiting, just as Specter Platoon was now waiting. The duality of their existence was stark. Active waiting for an invisible foe, every sense heightened, every nerve screaming. They moved with renewed caution, their pace slowed to an almost glacial crawl. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into a hidden form, every rustle of leaves a potential scout. Doc Ramirez, usually composed, gripped his M16 tighter, his eyes constantly scanning, a low hum of unspoken tension emanating from him. The jungle, with its towering trees and tangled undergrowth, became less a place of natural wonder and more a suffocating trap. Each step was a gamble, each breath a commitment. The quiet had transformed from unnerving to predatory. Miller could almost hear the jungle breathing, its breath heavy with unspoken threats. He knew this kind of calm. It was the calm before the python strikes, the moment the hunter freezes, waiting for the prey to make the fatal mistake. Specter Platoon, whether they knew it or not, were the prey. The waiting had become an active, dangerous engagement with an unseen adversary. It was combat without contact, a battle of nerves in a hidden war. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of relentless heat, sudden downpours, and an unceasing vigilance. Specter Platoon had established an observation post atop a low rise, hidden within a cluster of ancient banyan trees whose roots formed a natural, formidable fortress. From their perch, they overlooked a stretch of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, or what was believed to be a secondary NVA infiltration route. The intelligence had been vague, based on sporadic aerial recon and deciphered intercepts, but the signs Tanaka had found confirmed it. This was an active area. Their mission now was pure observation, to confirm movements, estimate strength, and pinpoint the tunnel complex. The waiting, however, was a form of psychological torture. Each man had his own way of coping. Miller, the pragmatist, meticulously cleaned his rifle, checked his gear, and studied his maps, projecting scenarios, always planning. Ramirez, the medic, kept an inventory of his supplies, his movements precise and calm, a quiet anchor in the brewing storm. Tanaka, the ghost, became one with the jungle. He would spend hours absolutely motionless, his eyes unblinking, tracking patterns of animal movement, the shifting light, the faintest scent carried on the breeze. He rarely spoke, communicating through gestures and the occasional clipped word. Daniels, however, struggled. The inactivity, coupled with the constant threat of the unseen, gnawed at him. He fidgeted, his gaze drifting from the jungle's oppressive green to the faces of his comrades, searching for reassurance. The relentless insects, mosquitoes, fire ants, leeches, were a constant torment, a physical manifestation of the jungle's insidious embrace. The humidity was a physical weight, pressing down, sapping energy, making every movement an effort. The heat shimmered off the leaves, distorting vision, making the familiar unfamiliar. Sleep was fragmented, haunted by half-dreams and the lingering sense of danger. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle sounded like an approaching enemy. The jungle was no longer just a backdrop. It was an adversary, slowly chipping away at their sanity. Miller watched Daniels. The young private was losing weight, his eyes perpetually bloodshot. The waiting game was eroding him. "Keep your head in the game, Daniels," Miller murmured one evening. as the jungle prepared to swallow the last vestiges of light. The enemy wants you to crack before they even show themselves. Daniels nodded, but his eyes were vacant, fixed on the impenetrable green wall surrounding them. He was seeing phantoms. The duality was stark. They were experiencing a continuous, grueling combat, but it was a combat of the mind, a battle against paranoia and the slow erosion of resolve, rather than bullets and grenades. The external calm was merely a facade for the internal storm raging within each man. It was the most brutal form of engagement, for there was no clear enemy to fight, no tangible target for their pent-up fear and aggression. Just the crushing weight of the unknown, hidden in plain sight within the deceptive calm of the jungle itself. Miller knew that prolonged inaction could be more deadly than any firefight. It preyed on the mind, turning comrades into strangers and the jungle into a living hell. They were in a holding pattern of death, waiting for the inevitable, for the break in the calm that would either save them or consume them. The jungle held its breath again. Tanaka, on point, had frozen, a statue carved from shadows. His hand went up, a silent command for everyone to drop. Miller, already low, felt his heart hammer against his ribs. This wasn't the usual cautious halt. This was an immediate, absolute drop. Seconds later, a faint rustle, almost indistinguishable from the jungle's natural symphony, drifted past. Then another, closer. Miller peered through a gap in the dense foliage. There, moving with unnerving silence, was a small NVA patrol. 3 men, perfectly camouflaged in their drab green fatigues, rifles held ready, eyes scanning. They were moving deliberately, sweeping the area, their path taking them directly under Specter Platoon's hidden OP. The air crackled with a primal fear. They were so close Miller could almost hear their breathing, could certainly smell the faint, acrid scent of their sweat in the earth. He saw the intricate stitching on the lead man's boonie hat, the faint scar above the second's left eye. These weren't phantoms. They were flesh and blood, and they were walking into their laps. Daniels, pressed flat against the earth, was trembling uncontrollably. His eyes, wide with terror, met Miller's. He wanted to scream, to shoot, to do something. Anything but lie there, utterly exposed, as death stalked inches away. Miller's grip on his M16 tightened, his finger hovering over the safety. One burst, and they could wipe out this small patrol. But then what? Their position would be compromised. The entire valley would know they were there. Their mission would be a bust, and extraction would be a near impossibility. This was the agonizing dilemma. Engage and risk everything, or maintain cover and let the enemy walk away, potentially to report their presence, or, worse, return with a larger force. It was a choice between immediate combat and prolonged, potentially fatal, waiting. His decision was instant, gut-wrenching, but clear. He slowly, painstakingly, brought his hand up, forming a fist, hold fire. Daniels, seeing the signal, looked as though he would shatter. A low, guttural sound escaped his throat, quickly stifled by Ramirez, who gently but firmly clamped a hand over the young man's mouth. The NBA patrol continued its slow, methodical sweep. The lead man paused, his head cocked, listening. Miller's breath hitched. Had he heard Daniels? The NBA soldier's eyes, dark and sharp, seemed to bore right through their hiding place. The moment stretched, agonizingly, until the soldier finally moved on, his gaze sweeping past their concealed positions without stopping. They disappeared as silently as they had come, swallowed by the jungle. Only when the last faint rustle had faded into the distance did Miller allow himself to breathe. He felt sweat stinging his eyes, his muscles screaming from the tension. Daniels, released by Ramirez, was gasping for air, tears streaming down his face. He hadn't made a sound, but the near miss had broken him. The Phantom Patrol had delivered a more devastating blow than any direct combat could have. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest act of courage was not to fight, but to endure the agonizing silence of not fighting, waiting for a danger that remained hidden in plain sight. The enemy knew how to use the jungle and the minds of men as weapons. Following the near disaster of the Phantom Patrol, a grim resolve settled over Specter Platoon. The incident had hammered home the reality of their situation. They were deep in enemy territory, constantly observed, and their mission of observation was a constant battle of nerves. Daniels, though shaken, seemed to have found a new, if weary, focus. The abstract fear had become concrete, and with it, a newfound understanding of Miller's harsh pragmatism. Tanaka, however, was restless. The NBA patrol had skirted too close, felt too deliberate. He spent an entire night on silent recon, moving like smoke through the undergrowth, returning just before dawn, his face etched with a quiet intensity. He signaled Miller to a hush conference. "Found it, Sarge," Tanaka whispered, his voice barely audible. "North by northwest, 2 clicks from the OP, perfectly hidden." He unfurled a crude, but detailed, map he'd sketched on a piece of waterproof paper, marking a small X. "Tunnel entrance, right under that triple canopy. You'd never see it from above." Miller studied the map, then Tanaka's face. The ghost didn't make mistakes. This was it, their primary objective. The intelligence had been right. The initial sense of accomplishment was quickly superseded by a wave of apprehension. Finding it was one thing, confirming its scale and purpose was another entirely. An entrance meant a network, a hidden world beneath their feet. Miller immediately radioed command, relaying Tanaka's discovery. The static-laced response crackled back. "Excellent work, Spectre. Confirm ingress/egress points. Estimated troop strength. Maintain observation. Possible extraction point identified for your return, but new intel needed first." More waiting, more peril. The calm of discovery quickly dissolved into the anticipation of a new, more dangerous phase. They were no longer simply observers. They were now on the cusp of direct action, albeit a covert one. The next day, under Tanaka's silent guidance, the team moved closer to the tunnel entrance, establishing a secondary, even more concealed observation point. The approach was agonizingly slow, every step a calculated risk. The jungle here was even denser, the air heavier, more claustrophobic. They moved like ghosts themselves, leaving no trace. When they finally reached a vantage point overlooking the tunnel entrance, Miller saw what Tanaka meant. It was a masterpiece of camouflage, a cleverly disguised opening in the side of a small, overgrown hillock covered with a thick curtain of vines and foliage, blending seamlessly into the jungle floor. A faint, almost imperceptible trail led to it, visible only to eyes as trained as Tanaka's. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a nerve center, a hidden artery of the enemy's logistics. They watched for hours, then for days. They saw small groups of NVA soldiers, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, emerge or disappear into the opening. They were moving supplies, carrying crates, sometimes even injured personnel. The deceptive calm of the jungle was suddenly very real, a thick, green veil hiding a bustling, dangerous world. The waiting had shifted from passive observation to an active, dangerous stakeout. They were hidden in plain sight, not just from the enemy, but from the realization of the sheer scale of the threat. The tunnel represented a much larger, more deeply entrenched enemy presence than they had initially imagined. And now they had to go in. The tunnel entrance confirmed, Miller faced a fresh set of dilemmas. HQ wanted more. They wanted a deeper understanding of the tunnel complex, its layout, its capacity, and most critically, to plant a tracking device that would allow for future airstrikes or larger ground operations. The very thought of sending a man into that subterranean labyrinth, a place designed to kill, made Miller's stomach churn. The extraction point, a small, barely viable clearing 5 clicks to the west, was contingent on them completing this suicidal reconnaissance. Miller laid out the options for the team. "We need a man in the hole, even just for a few yards," he stated, his voice low and serious. "Plant the tracker, get out. Tanaka, you're the best for it." Tanaka nodded, his face impassive. He knew it was his job. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, isn't that too risky?" Miller cut him off. "Everything out here is too risky, Daniels. This is our mission. The problem, as Miller saw it, was not just the inherent danger of the tunnel itself, the booby traps, the ambush points, the sheer claustrophobia, but the fact that the entrance was clearly in use. An NBA sentry could emerge at any moment. They needed a diversion, something to draw attention away, even for a few precious minutes. "We need to create a distraction," Miller mused, looking at Ramirez. Doc wasn't just a medic. He was resourceful, a master of improvisation. Something loud, something that will make them think a larger force is approaching, far enough away from the tunnel to draw them off, but close enough for them to commit. Ramirez, ever practical, pulled a small block of C4 from his pack. "I can rig a charge, Sarge. Not a big one, but enough to sound like a small skirmish. Timer, maybe 20 minutes lead time." Miller nodded. "Perfect. We set it up on a less traveled trail, a couple clicks east. They'll send a patrol to investigate. While they're distracted, Tanaka goes in." The plan was audacious, risky, and their only option. The waiting for the right moment had now become a strategic deployment of controlled chaos. This wasn't a sudden, reactive combat. It was a planned, deliberate action, a chess move against an unseen opponent. The duality was profound, planning for overt combat to enable covert infiltration. The team spent the rest of the day prepping. Tanaka meticulously checked his small sidearm, a suppressed .22 pistol, and a tiny tracking beacon. Ramirez, with a surgeon's precision, prepared the C4, wiring it to a crude but effective timer. Daniels, assigned to perimeter security during the diversion, checked his M16 for the 10th time, his fear now mixed with a sense of purpose. Miller, watching them, felt the familiar knot of dread and determination in his gut. He had sent men into worse situations, seen them come back or not come back. The jungle was a fickle mistress, and today, they were pushing their luck. The deceptive calm was about to be shattered, not by an ambush, but by their own calculated gamble, a deliberate disruption designed to expose a hidden enemy. The waiting for the explosion and for Tanaka's return would be the most excruciating combat of all. Under the oppressive cloak of pre-dawn darkness, the team moved into position for the diversion. The jungle was at its most eerie, the sounds of nocturnal life muted, replaced by the amplified thud of their own heartbeats. Ramirez, a small rucksack filled with the C4 charge and detonators, was led by Miller to a secondary trail, barely a game path, 2 clicks east of the tunnel entrance. The air was thick with humidity and the metallic scent of impending rain. The tension was a living thing, a coiled viper ready to strike. Ramirez worked quickly, burying the C4 charge under a pile of leaves and debris, carefully camouflaging the wire leading to the timer. His hands were steady practiced. This was his combat, the quiet, precise work of a technician preparing for destruction. He set the timer for 20 minutes, a small red LED blinking methodically in the dark. "That should draw them out," he whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. Enough bang to get their attention, not enough to blow a crater. Miller nodded, his eyes scanning the surrounding darkness. "Let's move. We don't want to be anywhere near this when it blows." As they melted back into the jungle, moving with agonizing slowness towards the tunnel entrance, the seconds stretched into an eternity. Each rustle of leaves, each snap of a twig, sounded like an alarm bell. Daniels, covering the rear, struggled to control his breathing, his M16 held at the ready, his eyes darting frantically. He imagined NVA patrols converging, drawn by the sound of their movement, by the very act of preparing the diversion. The quiet was pregnant with anticipation, a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. They reached their concealed observation point near the tunnel entrance with minutes to spare. Miller checked his watch. 5 minutes. 4. 3. The air seemed to grow heavier, thicker. Then, a dull concussion rumbled through the earth, a sound that wasn't particularly loud, but carried an unmistakable force. It was followed by the distant, sharp crackle of automatic rifle fire, simulated by a few preset blanks, designed to give the impression of a small, ongoing skirmish. The jungle reacted instantly. Birds erupted from the canopy, monkeys shrieked, and then a different kind of sound, the hurried, purposeful shouts of men. NBA. They were reacting. They were moving towards the sound of the skirmish, just as Miller had hoped. "Go, Ghost!" Miller breathed, a silent command to Tanaka. 20 minutes. Mox. Tanaka, a dark wraith, was already moving, slithering towards the camouflaged tunnel entrance. His movements were fluid, silent, as if he were part of the very jungle itself. The diversion had worked. The combat had begun, not with Specter Platoon's direct engagement, but with their calculated deception. The sound of the simulated firefight was their battle cry, a decoy in the deceptive calm. But the real battle, the one that truly mattered, was about to unfold in the silent, suffocating darkness of the enemy's hidden lair, where Tanaka was now venturing, hidden in plain sight, even for his own comrades. Tanaka became the darkness. He moved towards the tunnel entrance, every sense sharpened to an excruciating degree. The distant echoes of the simulated firefight provided a perfect sound screen, masking the almost imperceptible sounds of his infiltration. He reached the curtain of vines and foliage, parting them with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 100 times. The entrance was a narrow, low-slung opening, smelling of damp earth, stagnant air, and something else, a faint, acrid scent of human habitation, of unwashed bodies and cooked rice. He took a single, deep breath of the humid jungle air, then slipped inside. The darkness was absolute, immediate, suffocating. He switched on a small, red-filtered headlamp, its dim glow barely penetrating the blackness. The tunnel was rough-hewn, surprisingly narrow, forcing him to crouch low, his shoulders brushing against the damp, cold earth. The claustrophobia was instant, visceral. He could feel the weight of the mountain pressing down on him. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but he pushed it down, focusing on the mission. The tracker, no bigger than a Zippo lighter, was clutched in his gloved hand. He moved slowly, methodically, his boots silent against the packed earth floor. He checked for tripwires, for pressure plates, for the telltale signs of booby traps. He knew the NVA excelled at these subterranean death traps. He advanced only a few yards when he heard it, a faint, rhythmic thudding deep within the tunnel. Movement. He froze, pressing himself against the rough wall, switching off his headlamp. The darkness enveloped him once more, a living entity. The thudding grew slightly louder, accompanied by the muffled murmur of voices. They were close, too close. He could feel the vibrations through the earth. He was inside their hidden world, a whisper of death in their very stronghold. His heart hammered, threatening to betray him. He slowly, painstakingly, reached into his pack for a tiny, magnetic tracking device. He had to place it and get out. The sounds of movement were approaching, echoing strangely in the confined space. He knew he only had seconds. He located a small, sturdy wooden beam, likely a support for the tunnel roof, directly above him. It was a perfect spot, high enough to avoid casual detection, but low enough for the signal to escape the earth. With agonizing slowness, he reached up, pressing the magnetic tracker firmly against the wood. It clicked into place, a tiny, almost inaudible sound. He pulled his hand back, his muscles screaming. Just as he finished, a faint glow appeared around the bend of the tunnel ahead. An NVA sentry, carrying a dim lantern, was approaching, his silhouette growing larger, his quiet footsteps now clearly audible. Tanaka flattened himself against the cold, damp wall, holding his breath, blending into the absolute darkness, trusting the jungle's deception even underground. The sentry passed, a mere arm's length away, his lantern casting long, dancing shadows, illuminating Tanaka's hidden spot for a terrifying second before moving on. The smell of tobacco and damp cloth from the soldier's uniform was overwhelming. Tanaka remained motionless until the sound of the sentry's footsteps faded into the tunnel's depths. He then began his slow, agonizing retreat. The tracker's faint, silent signal now a lifeline, a beacon of their mission's success, embedded in the very heart of the deceptive calm that concealed the enemy's hidden world. Tanaka emerged from the tunnel entrance like a ghost shedding its skin, his face streaked with sweat and grime, his eyes still adjusted to the subterranean darkness. Miller was waiting, M16 ready. A silent nod passed between them. The tracker was placed. Mission accomplished, but the relief was short-lived. The jungle, no longer held in a deceptive calm, had come alive with the sounds of alarm. The distant, simulated firefight had done its job too well. They could hear the shouts of NVA patrols, now closer, more urgent, their voices echoing through the trees. They were converging, drawn by the distraction, and now, likely, sweeping the general area of the tunnel, searching for the source of the disruption. The combat phase had just begun, but it wasn't the one they had planned for. "We gotta move now," Miller hissed, urgency in his voice. "They're coming." Specter Platoon, abandoning their hidden OP, began a hurried, tactical retreat towards the pre-designated extraction point. Their stealth was replaced by speed, their silence by the rustle of hurried movement. Every snapped twig, every stumbling footstep felt like a betrayal. The jungle, which had so recently been their sanctuary, now felt like a giant, suffocating hand closing around them. Daniels, still reeling from the tunnel infiltration's psychological weight, stumbled, catching himself on a thorny vine. "Sarge, I hear them," he gasped, his voice raw with panic. Indeed, the sounds were growing louder. The distinct chatter of AK-47s being racked, the crunch of boots on the forest floor, the guttural commands of NVA officers. They were being hunted. The air became thick with the smell of wet earth and distant cooking fires, now mixed with the metallic tang of fear. Suddenly, Tanaka, still on point, dropped to one knee, M16 up. "Movement front," he whispered, his voice sharp. A small NVA blocking force, perhaps 4 men, had moved to cut off their escape route, alerted by the general commotion. This was no longer a silent game of cat and mouse. It was a direct confrontation. "Contact!" Miller roared, as the first shots erupted from the NVA position. The jungle exploded into chaos. The crack of AK-47s ripped through the air, answered by the controlled bursts of Specter Platoon's M16s. Tracer rounds sliced through the gloom, painting fiery lines through the dense foliage. Daniels, fear forgotten, returned fire, his M16 spitting out rounds in a frantic attempt to suppress the enemy. A sharp, stinging pain tore through his left arm. "Arc," he cried out, clutching his bicep. Doc Ramirez was on him in an instant, pulling him behind the meager cover of a fallen tree, his practiced hands already ripping open Daniels' sleeve. "Graze, Daniels, stay low," he shouted over the din of battle. Miller, laying down suppressive fire, shouted commands. "Push forward. Don't let them pin us." The brief, furious firefight was a stark contrast to the preceding days of tense waiting. It was raw, brutal, and immediate. The deceptive calm had finally shattered, replaced by the deafening roar of combat, leaving no room for thought. Only instinct, survival, and the desperate, urgent need to escape the jungle's tightening embrace. The firefight was short, brutal, and utterly disorienting. Specter Platoon managed to break through the blocking force, leaving behind a scene of chaos and sporadic NVA shouts. Daniels, his left arm roughly bandaged by Ramirez, gritted his teeth, his face pale but determined. The pain was a dull ache, a constant reminder of how close he'd come. The immediate combat was over, but the retreat was now a desperate race against time. The NVA knew their general location, and they would be relentless. Miller pushed his men hard, their pace frantic, fueled by adrenaline and the growing sounds of the pursuing enemy. Every shadow seemed to hold an NVA soldier, every rustle of leaves a potential ambush. The jungle, once a place of deceptive calm, was now a hostile, suffocating entity, its dense foliage concealing more threats than cover. They moved towards the extraction point, a small, barely viable clearing marked on their map, a tiny beacon of hope in the overwhelming green. The last 2 kilometers felt like 20. The air grew heavy again, not with humidity, but with the metallic scent of an approaching thunderstorm, a fitting backdrop to their desperate flight. Distant thunder rumbled, mimicking the sounds of distant explosions, adding to the confusion and paranoia. As they finally burst through the last line of dense vegetation, the clearing opened up before them, a muddy, rain-slicked patch of earth. Miller immediately brought his radio to his lips. Specter Actual to Eagle 1. Specter Actual to Eagle 1. This is Specter on station at LZ Nightingale. Request immediate extraction. We are taking fire. Repeat, taking fire. Even as he spoke, a volley of AK-47 rounds ripped through the trees at the edge of the clearing, tearing leaves and branches. The NBA had closed in. The waiting for the helicopter was now the most agonizing part of the entire mission. They dropped into defensive positions, returning sporadic fire, trying to suppress the enemy, trying to buy time. Ramirez dragged Daniels into a hollow, shielding him, his M16 spitting short bursts into the tree line. The roar of a distant chopper, faint at first, then rapidly growing louder, became the most beautiful sound they had ever heard. Eagle 1. It was coming. The helicopter appeared like a mechanical beast, tearing through the cloud cover, its rotors whipping the air into a frenzy. It came in hot, guns blazing, the door gunners spraying the tree line with continuous fire. The NVA responded with a barrage, tracer rounds arcing through the air, some striking the chopper with sharp, metallic pings. Go! 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 Miller screamed, waving his men forward. They scrambled aboard, Daniels being helped by Ramirez, his wounded arm throbbing. Miller was the last one in, turning to lay down a final burst of suppressive fire before hauling himself inside. As the chopper lifted off, taking hits, Miller looked down at the rapidly receding jungle. The green canopy stretched out, vast and indifferent, hiding its secrets, its dangers, its deceptive calm. He saw the flashes of muzzle fire from below, small, angry sparks in the darkening forest. Daniels, clutching his arm, stared blankly out the open bay door, his eyes wide, unseeing. The hidden in plain sight wasn't just the enemy in the jungle. It was the unseen toll on their own souls, the quiet echoes that would forever linger, even as the roar of the chopper carried them away from the immediate danger. The battle was over, but the waiting for its true cost had just begun. The H-1 Huey, Eagle 1, shuddered and bucked as it climbed, its powerful rotors carving a path through the bruised sky. Bullet holes peppered its fuselage, testaments to the hostile reception they'd received. Inside, the roar of the engines and rotor blades was deafening, a merciful shield against the lingering echoes of the jungle's fury. Miller sagged against the bulkhead, the adrenaline slowly draining from his system, leaving him hollowed out and weary to the bone. He watched the A Shau Valley shrink below, the impenetrable green canopy giving no hint of the hidden world it contained, the tunnels, the patrols, the deceptive calm that had nearly claimed them. The hidden in plain sight nature of the war was never more stark than from this vantage point. The land looked peaceful, serene, yet he knew the unseen horrors that lurked beneath its verdant surface. Ramirez was already tending to Daniels, expertly redressing the wound on his arm. Daniels stared out the open door, his face streaked with dirt and blood, his eyes fixed on the receding jungle. He wasn't looking at the enemy or the beauty or the danger. He was looking at nothing, seeing everything. The trauma was etched onto his young features, a fresh scar on his soul. He had survived, but he was irrevocably changed. The waiting had broken him more than the combat had. The brief, intense firefight was a release, an explosion of energy after days of suffocating anticipation. But the silent, unseen warfare, the constant vigilance, the psychological toll of being hunted, the agonizing decision not to engage, the terror of infiltration. That was the true battle, the one that lingered. Tanaka, ever stoic, sat opposite Miller, meticulously cleaning his M16, his movements precise and unhurried, as if the last few days had been just another Tuesday. But Miller saw the faint tremor in his hands, the subtle tension around his eyes. Even the ghost carried the weight. The dualities of combat and waiting, of action and inaction, had played out in their starkest forms in the last few days. They had waited for contact, then almost invited it with a diversion. They had experienced combat without firing a shot, and then fought a desperate battle for survival. The deceptive calm of the jungle had been both a sanctuary and a cage, a place where the greatest threats were often the ones you couldn't see, the ones that festered in the mind. As the chopper gained altitude, leaving the A Shau behind for good, Miller closed his eyes. He knew the jungle would continue its relentless whisper, its echoes resonating in their minds long after the physical wounds healed. Daniels would carry the phantom fear of unseen eyes. Miller would carry the heavy burden of every decision, every life entrusted to him. The story of Specter Platoon wasn't just in the bullets fired or the intelligence gathered. It was in the silent battles fought within themselves, in the hidden places, in the spaces between the fire and the fear, forever touched by the jungle's deceptive calm. They were extracted, but a part of them, hidden in plain sight, remained there, an echo in the valley's vast, indifferent green.